Her first love returned to the restaurant after years apart. Now he was the Alpha King, a true real-life story. The coffee machine had been broken for 3 days. Nadia knew this. She had known it since Monday, since the exact moment it produced something that looked like coffee but smelled like burnt rubber and grief. She had unplugged it, replugged it, hit it twice with an open palm the way her mother used to hit the old television set, and gotten nowhere both times. It was now Thursday morning, 7:14 a.m., and she was doing it again, hitting the machine, getting nowhere. The restaurant was not full. The restaurant was never full at 7:14 on a Thursday. There was old Mr. Salim in the corner booth, who came every morning and ordered the same thing and never once looked at the menu, because the menu had not changed in 11 years, and neither had he. And there was the woman Nadia, privately called Shawl Lady, who always draped her cardigan over the back of her chair before sitting down, a ritual so consistent it had become part of Nadia's morning, the same way the cardamom smell was part of it, the same way the creak of the third floorboard was part of it. This restaurant ran on ritual. It had always run on ritual. Her mother had built it that way. Nadia hit the coffee machine a third time, harder, and it gurgled and then hissed, and then produced something that was almost, just barely, generously speaking, coffee. She poured it into a cracked ceramic mug, the white one with the chip on the rim that she had been meaning to throw away for 2 years, and put it on the counter and called it done. The door opened. She did not look up. She was wiping down the counter, the same patch she wiped every morning, a patch that had been wiped so many times she sometimes thought the surface had started to thin, like she was slowly polishing it down to nothing, like eventually she would wipe all the way through and find whatever was underneath, and then what would she do? She heard the footsteps. She registered them the way she registered everything. Catalogued, categorized, filed away. Heavy step, deliberate, unhurried, shoes that probably cost more than the coffee machine. She made this last assessment without looking. Black coffee. 2 words. Low, flat, like a man who had never once in his life second-guessed a coffee order. She reached for the mug she had just poured, and then, because she was going to have to hand it across the counter, she looked up. Khalil. That was the first coherent thought she had. Just his name. 1 word. No punctuation. No emotional weight attached to it. Just the name arriving in her head the way a dropped plate arrives on a tile floor. Fast and loud and impossible to put back together. He was bigger than she remembered. That was the second thought. Not taller, exactly, but broader somehow. Like the years had added mass in every direction. Like he had simply become more. His jaw was the same. His eyes were the same. That dark, still color that had always made Nadia think of water that goes very deep and has no interest in telling you how deep. His hair was shorter. He was wearing a suit that fit him the way suits fit men who have enough money to stop thinking about suits. He was standing inside the door of the restaurant her mother had built. He was looking at her like no time had passed at all. She put the coffee down in front of him. Her hands did not shake. She was very proud of her hands. Nadia. He said her name. That was all he said. Just her name. The same way he had always said it, like it had more syllables than it actually had, like there was a whole sentence hiding inside it that he was choosing, for the moment, to keep to himself. She turned around. The sugar packets needed rearranging. She put the brown sugar on the left side and the white sugar on the right side, and then reconsidered and moved the brown sugar to the right and the white sugar to the left, and then stood very still and looked at what she had done and decided it was wrong, but also decided that she was not going to fix it right now, because fixing it would require moving her hands, and she was not sure her hands were as steady as she had been proud of a moment ago. Behind her, Khalil said nothing. He had always been good at saying nothing. Criminally, infuriatingly good at it. He could sit in more silence than anyone she had ever met, and the silence never seemed to bother him the way it bothered her, the way it filled her up from the inside until she started talking just to make it stop. She did not talk. She put the sugar back the way it had been before she touched it. He had left when they were 23. This is not the kind of sentence that summarizes a leaving. A leaving is not one thing. It is 100 small things that accumulate until the weight of them tips something over, And even then, it does not happen all at once. It happens in pieces. A conversation that ends wrong, a silence that runs too long, a Tuesday morning when someone picks up a bag and walks out a door and the door closes and stays closed. But Nadia was not the kind of person who had patience for 100 small things. If she had to choose one sentence, if someone made her choose, she would say, "He left because he had a plan, and the plan did not include staying here, and she had known about the plan, had in fact known about it in the way you know about weather when you can feel it coming in your joints before it arrives, and she had stayed quiet about it because her mother's hands had started to tremble, and somebody had to stay, and she was the only person there was." That was the whole story. 2 sentences. She had never told them to anyone. She had told herself, on bad nights, that she had made a choice, that she had chosen to stay, that this was not the same as being left, not exactly, not technically. She was still not sure she believed herself. He had built something. She knew this in fragments, things that filtered through to her over the years, through people who knew people who had heard things, through a name on a website she had searched once at 2 a.m. and then closed without reading, through the particular kind of absence that a successful person leaves in the spaces where they used to be ordinary. He had built a hospitality group, restaurants, properties, some kind of regional operation that had apparently become large enough to matter. She had gathered this information the way you gather information you are trying not to gather, piece by piece, without meaning to, building a picture you keep telling yourself you are not building. She had stayed and kept the restaurant. She had kept it through her mother's illness, and through the year after, through the bills that came in like a tide, and the months when she was so tired she cried in the kitchen, not because she was sad, but because her body had simply run out of other options. She had kept it because it was hers, and because it smelled like her mother, and because some days that was enough, and some days it was very, very far from enough. They had both ended up somewhere. Neither of them had ended up whole. This was not something she was going to say out loud. This was not something she was going to say at all. She was going to wipe down the counter and rearrange the sugar and wait for him to finish the coffee and leave. That was the plan. Mr. Salim coughed. It was the particular cough of a man who wants attention but is too dignified to ask for it directly. Nadia recognized it immediately because he used it approximately 4 times per morning, and she had long since made a private map of the variations. The mild cough meant more tea. The deep cough meant the bread was slow. The quiet almost cough meant he wanted someone to talk to. This one was the quiet almost cough. She went to him. "Feeling cold today," Mr. Salim said, wrapping both hands around his tea glass like it was the only warm thing in the world. "The heating's on," Nadia said. "Old bones," he said, philosophically, the way he said most things, as though life had delivered him to a point of complete equanimity, from which everything was simply interesting rather than difficult. He looked past her, at the counter, at the man sitting there. "Someone new," he said. "Someone having coffee," Nadia said. Mr. Salim looked at her. He had very sharp eyes for someone who claimed his bones were giving out. He said. She refilled his tea and went back to the counter. Khalil had not moved. The coffee was half gone. He was looking at the wall behind the counter, the one where her mother had hung the old photographs, the ones from before the restaurant was a restaurant, when it was just a plan that a woman with small savings and very large conviction had decided to make real. Khalil had looked at those photographs many times. He knew every one of them. Nadia had explained them to him once, years ago, standing in this exact spot, pointing at each image and narrating it the way you narrate things to someone you want to understand you. He had listened the way he listened to everything, completely, without interrupting. She had been 20 years old and had thought, this is a person who will always be here. She had been wrong in ways she was still calculating. Shaw Lady ordered her usual, which was warm milk with just a little bit of honey and a piece of bread with butter, and she always said a little bit of honey in a tone that suggested she was negotiating with herself about how much honey was acceptable and had landed on a little bit as the compromise position. Nadia made the milk and carried it over. "Is that your brother?" Shaw Lady asked, looking at the counter with the directness of a woman who had decided at some point in her life that politeness and curiosity were not compatible and had chosen curiosity. "No," Nadia said. "Cousin? No." Shawl Lady looked at her with the expression of someone doing math. "Old friend," Nadia said, which was true, the way that calling the ocean some water is technically true. She went back to the counter. It was Farouk, her delivery driver, who changed things. Farouk came in at 8:30 every Thursday to drop off the produce and to drink 1 cup of tea that he never paid for and that Nadia never asked him to pay for, because it was part of an arrangement that had existed before she could remember, an arrangement between him and her mother that had simply transferred to her the way everything had transferred to her, as obligation and as gift simultaneously. He came in at 8:30 on this particular Thursday and put the crates down and looked at the counter and stopped. Not the way people usually stopped when they saw something unexpected, the way people stopped when they saw something they recognized. A long stop, a recalibrating stop. "That's," Farouk started. "Tea's on," Nadia said. "Nadia, that's 2 sugars, right?" "That's Khalil Haddad," Farouk said, in a voice that had dropped half an octave, the voice people use when they are saying a name that has become bigger than a name, when the name has started doing the work of a whole story. Nadia poured the tea. "I've seen him," Farouk said, still looking, "on the business channel, the one my wife watches. They did a segment, the expansion deal. You know, the 3 properties on the new development road, all his. And those aren't even—" He stopped, looked at her. "Did you know he was coming?" "Tea," Nadia said. She put it on the counter. Farouk picked it up without looking at it. He was still looking at Khalil. "He built something," Farouk said. "Like, built something serious. They called him." He made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something else. Something without a name. "They called him some kind of king of the restaurant industry in this region." "I'm not joking. That was the actual phrase." Nadia looked at the man sitting at her counter, her cracked mug, her chipped-rim coffee, her restaurant that smelled like cardamom and old wood, and her mother's curtains. He looked back at her. He did not look like a king. He looked like Khalil. He looked exactly like the person she had spent a very long time carefully not thinking about, and here he was, in her restaurant, looking at her with those water-that-goes-deep eyes, and the room was small, and the morning was ordinary, and everything was completely wrong. She went to the back. The kitchen had no opinions about anything. This was what she liked about kitchens. They were all function, all process. Things come in raw, and you apply heat and time and attention, and they come out as something else. Something people want, and the kitchen did not care how you felt about it. The kitchen was indifferent in the most comforting way possible. She checked the stock she already knew was fine. She rearranged items on the shelf that did not need rearranging. She stood in the corner by the back door and breathed in and out in a way that she was not calling controlled breathing, because she was not the kind of person who did controlled breathing. She was just standing there breathing, which was different. It was not different. She went back out. He was still there. Of course he was still there. The coffee was finished, but he had not asked for more, and he had not left, and she had not yet figured out what these 2 facts meant together, whether it was politeness or intention, or something she did not have a word for yet. She took the mug. She refilled it without asking. She put it back. "Your mother's lamb," Khalil said. She went still. "The Friday recipe. You still make it?" And she was 21 years old. She was 21 and it was a Friday, and her mother was alive and had both hands steady and was teaching Nadia the lamb the way she had been taught it. The recipe that did not exist on paper, that lived in someone's hands and had to be passed hand to hand, and Khalil was in the back booth, the one by the window, with a borrowed textbook open on the table and a pin behind his ear, and she was bringing him tea he had not asked for, and he had looked up and smiled at her. Not a polite smile, not a stranger being thanked smile, a real one, a smile that knew her, and she had stood there holding the teapot thinking, "I am in so much trouble." She had been right about that. "Yes," she said. One word. She kept her voice level. She was good at keeping her voice level. It was a skill she had acquired the same way she had acquired the ability to carry 4 plates with 2 hands and do the accounts at 11 p.m. without making mistakes, out of necessity, because the alternative was not managing, and she had decided that was not an option. "Still Fridays," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Good," he said. And that was all. No elaboration, no explanation of why he had asked, no information about what it meant that he had walked into her restaurant on a Thursday morning 7 years after leaving and asked about a lamb recipe from a woman who was no longer here to make it. Just good. She wanted to say something. She could feel the something forming in her chest, a pressure behind her sternum, the shape of words that were trying to become a sentence. She had a lot of sentences. She had been saving them for 7 years without meaning to, storing them in the same place she stored everything she did not know what to do with, and now here was the person they had been addressed to, and her mouth stayed closed. The sugar was on the wrong side again. She fixed it. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Salim left. He did this every morning at 10 o'clock, precisely, because he had a schedule, and his schedule had become his skeleton, the structure inside him that held everything upright. Shawl Lady had left at 9. Farouk had gone at 9:15, his crates empty, his tea finished, his eyes still doing something complicated every time they moved between Nadia and the counter. The restaurant was quiet, just the hiss of the coffee machine, still broken, still managing, and the sound of the street outside, and the creak of the third floorboard when Nadia walked across it to wipe down the far table. Khalil stood up. She heard the movement, did not turn around. She heard the click of his heels on the floor, measured and deliberate, and she counted the steps the way she used to count things when she was small and anxious, and her mother would tell her to count something if she felt scared, because counting meant your brain was busy, and if your brain was busy, it could not also be panicking. 4 steps to the door. She was still facing the far wall. "I'll come Friday," he said. Not a question, not exactly a statement, something in between, something that left a space she could have filled if she had wanted to. She did not fill it. She heard the door. The small rush of outside air that came every time it opened. She knew this air. She had felt it every morning for 6 years, cool, and carrying the smell of the bread shop 3 doors down. And then the door closed. She stood there, the rag in her hand, the table already clean, and then the anger arrived, and it was, like it always was for her, a relief, a known thing, a familiar weight that settled into her hands and her jaw and her chest and made everything stop moving in directions she couldn't predict. She had learned, years ago, that she could not trust softness under pressure. Softness bent in ways she couldn't control, and said things she hadn't planned to say, and felt things at volumes that were too loud for the room she was in. Anger was different. Anger was solid. Anger had edges she could hold on to. She was angry at him for not warning her. She was angry at herself for having an internal monologue about a man who had walked in, drank 2 coffees, asked about a recipe, and left. She was angry at the sugar packets for having opinions. She was angry at the coffee machine for its general inadequacy. Most of all, she was angry at the way he had looked at her, like no time had passed. Time had passed. Time had passed the way it passes when someone is not there to share it with you, which is to say, heavily, and leaving marks. She wiped the table. It was already clean. She wiped it anyway. She found it at 11. When she went to clear the counter, stack the cups, do the small end-of-morning accounting of what had been used and what needed restocking, her hand found something under the mug. A card. Business card. Plain, quality paper stock. The kind of paper that costs more per card than it has any right to. On the front was his name, his title, and she noted, with something she was calling detached curiosity, that the title was more than she had expected, 4 words that described a company large enough to have an actual title, and a phone number. On the back, his handwriting. She recognized it. She had not thought she would still recognize it, but she did. Immediately, the particular way he made the first letter of a word, slightly larger than the rest, without meaning to. The way his sentences ran slightly uphill. 3 words. She read them twice. She put the card face down on the counter and left it there and went and served the lunch customers, all 4 of them, 2 regulars and 2 new faces, a couple who shared the same meal in the way of people who have been together long enough to have stopped caring about getting separate orders. She took their plates and brought their tea, and calculated their bill, without the card entering her thoughts once, or if it entered her thoughts she was not acknowledging it, which was not the same thing as it not entering her thoughts, but was close enough to function. She put the card in her apron pocket at 1 o'clock. She did not read it again. The afternoon was ordinary. This was the thing about ordinary days. They kept going. Some days you thought the weight of the thing that had happened would change the texture of the hours, would make them slow or thick or strange. But the afternoon was just the afternoon. The light moved across the tiles the way it always did, arriving at the far wall at 2 and retreating by 4. The bread she had proofed that morning came out of the oven correctly. A pipe made the sound it always made, a small complaining sound, the sound of old infrastructure expressing its feelings, and she made a note to call the plumber again, even though the plumber had said last time there was nothing to fix. Her cousin called at 3. Her cousin always called at 3 on Thursdays because she worked in an office where 3 o'clock on Thursday was apparently the precise time when all motivation expired, and the only remedy was to call Nadia and talk for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Nadia did not tell her about the morning. She almost did. She felt the sentence forming twice. Once when her cousin said, "Anything happened today?" in the tone of someone who expects the answer to be no, and once when her cousin said, "You sound weird," which was the kind of observation Nadia found deeply unfair because she did not sound weird. She sounded exactly like herself, except she was standing in the kitchen holding a phone with her free hand in her apron pocket, her fingers not quite touching the card but aware of it the way you are aware of a sound that has stopped but left a frequency humming somewhere behind it. "I'm fine," she said. "You sound weird," her cousin said again. "The coffee machine is broken," Nadia said. "Still? Still. Buy a new one." "The old one was my mother's," Nadia said. And that was the end of that conversation, because her cousin had known her mother too, and there were rooms in certain conversations that neither of them went into. The restaurant closed at 7. 7 o'clock every evening because her mother had decided that a restaurant that stayed open too late stopped being a restaurant and started being a burden, and her mother had had specific opinions about what she was and was not willing to carry. Nadia locked the front door. She swept the floor. She washed the last cups. She covered the bread that had not sold, stacked it in the way that kept it from going stale overnight, a method she had learned from watching her mother do it so many times that the motion was in her hands before it was in her memory. She turned off the lights. She stood in the dark restaurant for a moment. This was something she did sometimes. Just stood in it, in the dark, after everyone had gone, not because she was being sentimental, or not only that, but because there was a version of the restaurant that only existed in this quiet, in this particular dark, and she did not want to stop knowing it. Her mother had stood here too, had looked at this same dark, the same way, had felt whatever it felt like to have built a thing and to still have it standing. The curtains smelled like her. Still, after everything, still. Nadia stood there until her eyes adjusted, and then a little longer after that, and then she went to the back and picked up her bag and her keys and her jacket, and she left. She sat in her car for 6 minutes before she took the card out of her pocket. She had been aware of the 6 minutes because she had looked at the clock when she got in, and then looked at it again when she finally reached into her apron, which she had folded on the seat next to her, and the math was 6 minutes, which was long enough that she had to acknowledge she was doing something and not just accidentally pausing before going home. She turned the card over. 3 words. "I'm still here." She sat with that for a while. The street outside was quiet. One light was on in the bread shop, someone working a late shift or an early start. A car went past slowly, the kind of slow that meant the driver was looking for a number on a door and not finding it. The wind moved the trees at the end of the road in a way that made them look, briefly, like they were deciding something. He was still here. She did not know what to do with that. She had built an entire interior architecture around his not being here, had arranged her life around it, the way you arrange furniture around a gap where something used to stand, carefully, with intention, making the gap part of the design so no one could see it was a gap. She had gotten very good at this. She had gotten so good at it that some days she forgot it was a design and thought it was just the way the room looked. And now, "I'm still here." 3 words. Uphill handwriting. Quality paper. She put the card in the zip pocket inside her bag, the one she used for things she needed to keep track of. She started the car. She did not sleep well. This was not unusual. She often did not sleep well. But on most nights when she did not sleep well, the thing keeping her awake was either the accounts, or the plumber, or a sound the building made at 3 a.m. that she had categorized as structural and non-urgent, but that her body had not received this memo and continued to treat as something requiring a response. Tonight it was different. She lay on her back in the dark and looked at the ceiling and did what she always told herself not to do, which was go back. She was good, normally, at not going back. She had developed a whole set of internal mechanics for the purpose. If a memory started, she would find something else to think about, something practical, something with steps, the recipe for the lamb, the order of operations for proofing bread, the sequence of tasks for opening the restaurant in the morning. It was not suppression, she told herself. It was simply choosing where to put her attention. She was a person with a lot of things requiring attention. She could not afford to spend it everywhere. Tonight the mechanics failed. She went back anyway. Not to one specific thing, but to the general shape of it, the feeling of being 21 and 22 and 23, and having someone present in your life with such consistency that they stop seeming like a person and start seeming like a condition of the world, like weather, like the morning light that comes in through the east window and lands on the same patch of floor every day. You stop noticing it because it is always there, and then one day it is not there and you notice it constantly. She had noticed it constantly. She had not told anyone. She had been busy. There was always a reason to be busy. Her mother needed things, and the restaurant needed things, and life needed things, and she had given all of those things what they needed and had not left over enough to examine herself carefully. She had been, she thought now, very cowardly about it. Very efficient. She had processed the whole thing the way you process a bad season. You get through it, you come out the other side, you plant again. But here was the problem with that. She had never actually planted again. She had kept the restaurant, and kept the rituals, and kept her routines and her regulars, and the curtains that smelled like her mother, and she had not let anyone come close enough to need her curtains to smell like them. She had a cousin who called at 3, and a plumber who came on request, and Farouk, who brought produce, and never asked for payment for his tea, and she had, apart from this, arranged herself very carefully in the direction of not needing. She was 28 years old. She was tired in a way that had nothing to do with how much she had slept. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had always been. She thought about what Farouk had said, king of the restaurant industry. She turned the phrase over the way you turn something over when you are trying to understand the shape of it. It was not a phrase that sounded like Khalil, not the Khalil she had known, the one who showed up to study with a borrowed textbook because he had lent his own to someone who needed it more, the one who had helped her carry a new refrigerator up 4 stairs because the delivery men had refused, and she had been on the phone with the company for 45 minutes getting nowhere. He had just appeared, taken one end, said ready, and they had done it. She had thought about that refrigerator more than a person should think about a refrigerator. She turned off the lamp. She lay in the dark. She thought he left, and then he built something, and now he is back, and I do not know what any of those things mean in sequence. She thought, I have been running a restaurant for 6 years, and I have not once wanted to be anywhere else, and I do not know if that makes me brave or if it makes me someone who stopped wanting things to want them less. She thought, Friday is 4 hours away. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for another hour and a half, but her eyes were closed, and sometimes that is the best you can do. Friday. She woke up earlier than usual. She told herself this was because she had the lamb to prepare, and the lamb took time. This was true. It was also true that she had lain awake until almost 2, and had therefore been asleep for less time than was ideal, and had woken with the particular clarity of someone who has slept lightly, every sound registering, every shift of light through the curtains landing on her eyelids. She went to the restaurant at 6. The lamb took 2 hours in preparation before it could even begin to cook. She knew this. She had known this since she was small, had watched her mother begin the lamb before the sun was properly up, working in the quiet kitchen with the radio on low and the smell of spice and slow heat filling the whole building. It was, her mother had told her once, a recipe that you could not rush. You could try, but it would know, and it would be different, and the people who came for it every Friday would notice, even if they could not say what was different. They would simply feel that something was not quite right. Food knows, her mother had said. Nadia had been 10 years old and had thought her mother was being mystical. Now she was 28 and knew she had been being accurate. She worked through the preparation with the care the recipe required. She did not think about the card in her bag. She did not think about 3 words written uphill on quality paper. She thought about the lamb. There was a particular quality to this kind of work that she had always found steadying, the quality of doing something with your hands that required your full attention, something where an error was visible and correctable and the stakes were understandable. You put too much of the wrong spice and you could taste it. You left it too long and the texture told you. The feedback was immediate and honest, in a way that most things were not, in a way that people, for instance, were almost never. People were not honest the way lamb was honest. People had whole interior lives running alongside the things they said, whole territories of feeling that they were not going to map for you, and you had to guess at the shape of those territories from the available evidence, from the way someone said a name or didn't say it, from what they asked about and what they left alone, from whether they sat on a broken stool without complaining about it. She put the lamb in the pot. The restaurant opened at 8. By 9 there were 5 people in it, which was good for a Friday. Fridays were better than Thursdays. Something about the end of the week made people want to sit somewhere that was not their house, and drink something warm, and eat something that someone else had made. Nadia understood this. She was, in many ways, the same. She just happened to also be the one on the other side of the counter. He arrived at noon, not the way he had come yesterday, not quietly and without announcement, not in a way she could pretend not to notice for the length of time it took to wipe a counter. He came in at noon, when the restaurant was its most full, when there were 8 people eating and the lamb had been on for 4 hours, and the smell of it had reached the street, because at least 2 of her noon customers had told her they had smelled it walking past. He stood at the door for a moment. He was wearing different clothes than yesterday. Less formal. He looked more like himself, or more like the self she remembered. The suit had been armor, she realized now, and today he had left the armor at wherever he was staying, had come in the ordinary clothes of someone not trying to be impressive, and this was, somehow, worse. She had made peace with the suit. The suit was a stranger. This was Khalil. "You came," she said. She did not mean to say it. It came out flat and slightly incredulous, exactly the way she had told herself she would not sound. "I said I would," he said. "You did," she said. He sat at the counter. Same stool as yesterday. Same deliberate, unhurried placement of himself, like he was settling into something that had always been his. She did not tell him that stool had a slightly short leg and wobbled if you shifted your weight to the right. She did not tell him because he would find out on his own. He found out on his own. He shifted his weight to the right, and the stool wobbled, and he caught himself with a steadiness that suggested this had not surprised him the way it would have surprised a person who had not been sitting on broken things for 7 years and learned to adjust. "Stool's broken," she said. "I noticed," he said. "I've been meaning to fix it. When? When I get around to it." He looked at her. The ghost of something moved through his expression, something she recognized the way you recognize a song from the first 3 notes, before the whole song arrives. He had looked at her like that at 23 too, like she was something he was still working out, like she was a problem he had chosen to approach patiently. "Nadia," he said. "The lamb takes another 30 minutes, she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay." She went to check the lamb. In the kitchen she stood at the stove and stirred the lamb and told herself very firmly that she was a person who had things to do, and this was one of them. The lamb, the bread that was still in the oven, the herbs that needed chopping for the afternoon side dishes. She told herself she was not someone who made decisions in kitchens. Kitchens were for cooking. Decisions happened elsewhere. Her mother had made every decision in this kitchen. Nadia had known this even as a child, had sensed that the kitchen was where her mother went to think, where the act of preparing food was in some way the act of preparing herself for what came next. There was a practical quality to kitchens that made honesty easier, maybe. You had your hands occupied, you could not gesture dramatically, you were committed to the task in front of you even while your mind went somewhere else entirely. She stirred the lamb. She thought about 7 years. She thought about the fact that he had come back. She thought about the fact that she had not asked why, and he had not said why, and it was entirely possible that they would both sit with this unsaid thing indefinitely, or until the lamb was done, whichever came first. She thought about, I'm still here. She thought about the fact that he had sat down on a stool he knew was broken and said okay when she told him the lamb needed 30 minutes. Just okay. No resistance. Like he was prepared to wait. He had always been good at waiting. She was not. She brought the lamb out at 12:30. She put a plate in front of him without ceremony. No presentation, no description, just the plate, the bread on the side, the small dish of sauce her mother had always called the secret, that was not a secret because everyone knew what was in it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. It smells exactly the same, he said. It's the same recipe. I know, He stopped. He was not, as a rule, a man who started sentences and stopped them. She had rarely seen him do it. She found that she had noted this and filed it. He ate. She watched him in the way she watched all of her customers eat. The professional attention to whether the food was landing the way it was supposed to. Except it was not entirely professional, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. At some point, without planning to, she sat down. There was a stool behind the counter she kept for the late hours when her feet gave up the argument, and she sat on it now, and folded her arms on the counter and looked at her hands. "Why did you come back?" she said. She had said she was not going to ask this. She had been very clear with herself about not asking this. He put down his fork. He looked at her with those same eyes, water going deep. No urgency. "I built something," he said. "I wanted to. And then I came back." "That's not an answer." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "I know it's not," he said again. And his voice was different by the second time. Something had moved in it. Something had shifted, and she recognized the shift because she had caused it once, years ago, in a conversation she had tried very hard to forget the details of. "I don't have a complete answer. I have the part I can say out loud, and the part I'm still." He stopped again, picked up the fork. "The lamb is perfect," he said. It was the world's most obvious subject change. "I know," she said. He stayed until 2. The lunch crowd came and went around him. She served them and cleared the plates and took the money and said the things you say to people you see every week, the small social transactions that make up the texture of a day. And he sat at the counter and drank 2 more coffees and was present in the specific way he was always present, which was completely, without visible restlessness, without his attention going anywhere it had not chosen to go. When the restaurant quieted, he talked. Not about everything, not in a way that filled the 7 years with narrative and closed them off. More like someone dropping stones into water and watching what happened. Not a speech, not an accounting, just things offered carefully and left for her to do what she wanted with. He told her about the first 2 years, which had been difficult. She already knew this in the abstract. The way you know things about people that no one told you directly, from the tone of the absence they leave. She let him tell her anyway. He told her about the first restaurant he had opened. A small place, wrong location, terrible first month, better 4th month. The slow discovery that he was, actually, someone who could do this. She asked one question. "Were you scared?" He looked at her like she had asked something that surprised him by being the exact right question. "All the time," he said. That was the point. She thought about this for a while. She thought about staying and what it had cost. She thought about keeping and what that required. She thought about the fact that courage had not looked the same on both of them, that his had taken him out of this room and hers had kept her in it, and whether those were even the right words, courage, staying, leaving, or whether those were just the words available and the reality was something more complicated and less nameable. "I should have called," he said. "A year in, 2 years in, I should have called." She thought about saying, "Yes, you should have." She thought about saying, "I wouldn't have known what to do if you had." She said, "The coffee machine is still broken." He looked at the machine, then back at her. "I can look at it," he said. "You know about coffee machines?" "Not really." "Then you'll make it worse." "Probably," he said. They sat with that. Outside, the afternoon was continuing its ordinary business, the light doing what it always did at this hour, the street making its familiar sounds, the bread shop 3 doors down beginning the smell of late baking that would reach her by 3:30. Nothing had been resolved. She had not forgiven anything, had not said the things she had been storing, had not asked all the questions that were still sitting in a row somewhere behind her sternum. He had not explained himself completely, had not offered her the clean narrative that would allow her to put him in a category she understood. They were not 23. They were also not nothing. He left at 2. She walked him to the door this time. She did not plan to, but found herself doing it. The way you find yourself doing things you have not decided to do, guided by something that knows more than the deciding part of you. At the door he turned. "Next Friday?" he said. She looked at him. She thought about the lamb recipe that lived in her hands. She thought about the curtains, and the 3rd floorboard, and the cracked mug, and the sugar packets, and the coffee machine that was broken, and had been her mother's, and that she was not going to replace. She thought about 7 years, and what comes after. "The lamb," she said, "takes 4 hours. He understood what this meant. She could see that he understood it. He nodded once, without making more of it than it was, without turning it into something larger than the moment it was happening in. "I'll be here at 8, he said. He left. She stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the outside air, cool, carrying the bread smell from 3 doors down, and then she went back inside and locked nothing because it was still the middle of the afternoon and the restaurant was not closed. She went back to the counter. The cracked mug was still there. The sugar was on the right side. She moved it to the left. She stood there looking at it, and then she left it there, because maybe this time the left side was where it belonged, and the only way to know was to leave it and see how it felt in the morning. She had until Friday. That was not nothing. That was in fact quite a lot. That evening, after the restaurant was locked and dark and quiet, she did something she had not done in a long time. She sat at one of the tables. Not the counter, not the kitchen, not the back corner where she did the accounts. She sat at one of the actual tables, the ones her customers sat at, the ones her mother had chosen from a second-hand furniture place 15 years ago because they were solid and the right height, and the seller threw in the chairs for free. She sat at the table by the window, the back booth, the one with the view of the street, the one where Khalil used to sit with his borrowed textbook. She sat there in the dark, with her hands flat on the table. The street was quiet. A few lights on in the buildings opposite, the blue flicker of someone's television, a figure walking a dog that had opinions about a particular lamppost and was taking its time expressing them. The bread shop was dark. The night was cool enough that she could see it in the slight fog of her breath. She sat there for a long time. She thought about her mother, who had built this place out of determination and limited funds, and an absolute refusal to accept that something was not possible just because it was difficult. Who had cooked in this kitchen for 12 years and loved it. Who had passed the lamb recipe to Nadia's hands one Friday morning when her own hands had started to fail her, not making a speech about it, not framing it as what it was, just saying, "Come, watch, pay attention," and Nadia had paid attention, and now the recipe was in her hands, the way it had been in her mother's, and the chain of it went somewhere Nadia couldn't see the end of. She thought about 7 years of being the only person in this room who knew it as well as she knew it. 7 years of mornings and flour and accounts and the 3rd floorboard and the coffee machine and Mr. Salim and Shawl Lady and Farouk's tea. She thought about the fact that she had not been unhappy. This surprised her sometimes, when she thought about it carefully. She had been tired, and she had been lonely in the particular way of someone who is always surrounded by people but has no one to sit with after closing, and she had been afraid on the months when the bills ran close to the edge. But she had not been unhappy. The restaurant had given her something she could not fully name, a sense of continuing something, of being part of a chain of intention, of mattering to people in the small and daily way that was, she had come to believe, the only way that actually lasted. Happiness and meaning were not the same thing. She had figured this out somewhere in the third year, standing in the kitchen at 11 p.m. doing the accounts, and it had helped. It had not solved anything, but it had helped. The dog had finished with the lamppost and moved on. The television in the building opposite had gone dark. The street was very quiet now, the kind of quiet that only existed in the small hours, the quiet of a city that was not fully asleep but had stopped performing wakefulness for a while. She thought, he said he was scared, all the time. That was the point. She thought, I was scared too. I am still scared. I do not think I am done being scared. She thought, the difference between us was never that one of us was braver. The difference was what we were scared of. He had been scared of not trying. She had been scared of losing what she had. Neither of those was wrong. She could see that now, from this table, in this quiet. They were just different fears, pointing in different directions, and for a long time they had pulled in opposite ways, and nobody had said enough about it at the time to change anything. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know what next Friday would be, what the Friday after that would be, whether the thing that was beginning, if it was beginning, if that was even the right word for what was happening, if what was happening was a beginning or a continuation of something that had never actually ended, whether it would hold up under the weight of 7 years and the things that had not been said and the distance that had been built into the structure of their separate lives. She did not know. She had learned, in 6 years of running a place her mother built, that you could not know. You could prepare, you could be careful, you could follow the recipe with the attention it required, and the result was still not guaranteed, because there were variables you could not control, and the world was not interested in guaranteeing outcomes to people who wanted them. What you could do was show up, start at 6, put the lamb in, get the bread going, wipe the counter, let the people in when they came. She stood up from the table. She straightened the chairs the way she straightened them every night, habit and care combined, and she walked to the back and picked up her bag and turned off the last light. She paused at the door. The restaurant was dark. The curtains held their old smell. The photographs on the wall behind the counter were invisible in the dark, but she knew every one of them, could have named each image without seeing it, the way you know things that have been part of your life long enough to live in the body rather than the memory. I kept it, she said, to the dark, to the curtains, to no one in particular. Then she went home. Next Friday, 8 o'clock. The lamb would need 4 hours. She would start at 6.